Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 8. Episode 8 now, pretty good, of Not Another Demo. As you know, West Michigan Cloud Security Alliance, Not Another Demo. The purpose of these is to really try to change the conversation a little bit, to have a very real conversation with a chosen vendor, and to really get to the heart of what it is that they are able to do for your organization. We are very fortunate this week to have Matthew Radolec with us from Varonis. Varonis, for those of you, a lot of people watching this will probably know, is my former employer, so a company that I still hold dear to my heart. So super looking forward to this conversation. Of course, we got Anthony, Lloyd, Aaron, and myself from the Cloud Security Alliance as well. With that, Matthew, I'm going to hand things over to you to let you do an introduction of yourself and Varonis, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be here. While we were getting organized for today, I thought back to my first introduction to Cloud Security Alliance, which was in almost 10 years ago. So it's great to see what the organization has grown into since then. My name is Matt Radolec, Director of Security Architecture and Incident Response at Varonis. And just to answer your question right off the bat, what is Varonis? We're a data security platform that's focused on giving organizations control. How do they manage and protect their unstructured data? And how do they connect the dots between the stuff that happens with their data with the key pieces of their infrastructure? So a lot of organizations will talk with us about things like, how do I protect my data? Or how do I implement least privilege or zero trust? Or maybe, how do I show how I'm testing compliance to a lot of the popular regulations that involve data? CCPA, GDPR, Colorado data protection, Massachusetts breach notification. The list goes on and on of all these different very privacy and compliance centric regulations. And then also, how do we use all those same ingredients for a strong data security program, for a strong threat detection and response program? And that's probably where I play the most active role at Varonis.
So then, and you answered a little bit, but let's take it a little bit deeper. The first question that I always love to ask in these Not Another Demo recordings is, people are busier than ever right now. Surprisingly, even through COVID, maybe because no one is traveling, our calendars are booked solid. We've got more vendors than ever that are maybe hitting us up for doing meetings, talking about things. So explain to us why, given all of that, why would someone want to find room on their calendar for a meeting with Varonis?
Sure. So when we think about the environment that we're in, we're all at home, presumably, or in our home offices, maybe in the shed outside of our house, or in the basement, or wherever we're following. Even our listeners out there are probably all working from home. The security risks are different, and the way that you can implement controls around those risks are different. So there are some inherent risks to working remotely, like connecting to unsecured networks or devices, being on a compromised network, like maybe you live in a large apartment complex and you use the building Wi-Fi, and that in and of itself exposes your computers to threats that weren't there before. And so it changes the conversation on how you architect your controls around that. And so why you would want to give Varonis a shot is we focus on the data itself, the files and the folders that contain the information that you might even be legally obligated to protect. So whether your employee is at home and all they're doing is consuming Office 365, or maybe they're connecting it over the VPN and connecting into those core resources internally, everybody at some point, by and large, is touching data. Now, you might have some employees that don't interact with data. Maybe you've got some server administrators that don't touch files or folders that are out there, but their accounts have access to them. And that's what becomes even more important. When you think about how you monitor and protect your remote workforce, you also have to think about the access that your remote workforce has to your internal infrastructure. And you still need to weigh and balance the importance of protecting that with protecting people as they're at home. And that's where we have a strong value proposition. Whether that data sits at home or in the cloud or on-prem, we're able to help get an understanding of where the important data is, as well as monitor how it's used and possibly even identify misuse or abuse of that information.
So first of all, I think, can I go say Matthew, since we have Matt?
Yeah, I can be Matthew, no problem.
Okay. I mean, just for the sake of this. So in the data pipeline, where do you sit, right? Are you at the endpoint? Are you in the cloud? Are you in the data center? Where do you sit?
Yeah, we're a software solution. So we sit wherever you want to deploy us. We spread across, we're an analytics-based software solution. So what that means is we have a hub and spoke architecture. The central core of Varonis, the brain of Varonis, is either on your physical servers or your virtual infrastructure or your cloud infrastructure, right? And our collectors are distributed out in your environment, possibly where your data centers are. Those are the spokes. Those are what are doing things like event collection or performing our classification scans. So Varonis is entirely analytics based, meaning that we're either gathering information from files and folders themselves by accessing them directly, or we're receiving streams of events from key pieces of your infrastructure, like your NAS arrays, your Exchange servers, your SharePoint, your Office 365 environment, Active Directory, your VPN, DNS, and web proxy. We're receiving event streams from those places in order to perform analytics.
Now, what would be maybe like a direct competitor they might know? Are you considered, are you endpoint protection? Is it visibility? Is it, pseudo CASB? Like what is the meat and potatoes of what Varonis does?
We're a data security platform, and I know that doesn't fit into traditional categories from like one of the kind of key vendor market guide standpoints, but we offer a library of security controls that could fit into a lot of different buckets. I'll give you an example. File analysis or data discovery is a thing that a lot of organizations want to do. They want to figure out where their sensitive data is. Sometimes that's seen in part as a feature of DLP, right? Being able to do classification scans or DRM. Sometimes it's a feature of a labeling solution. Varonis has those capabilities. We can use Microsoft's AIP engine to label files. We can use our own custom-built classification engine to find out where your sensitive data is. Now, when you think about things like the actual management of that data, permissions visibility can be difficult, right? There's a lot of tools out there that can tell you about what groups people belong to, but not necessarily what data that they have access. And so that's somewhere where we're up against things like, I think SailPoint has an add-on to tell you for file system permissions. StealthBits is a company that also has like data security controls that they offer. I think of like DLPs like Symantec or McAfee that have some file analysis capabilities, but figuring out that's like one part of the mission from a data security standpoint. So we're a data security platform. We want to do more than just those individual components of a data security program. So we're also going to do things like access requests and entitlement reviews, which might be a feature of like an IAM solution, right? But typically those IAM solutions don't extend to data. We're also doing log analytics and behavioral analytics. So that would be a features of like a UEBA solution or even a SIEM solution, but we're not those things, because we provide expert grade analytics on the systems that we support versus creating a platform that can support any data source. And so I would say we fit into the data security platform category.
So you mentioned you're a data analytics company, and I think that's a great introduction to what Varonis is. But once we have all this data and we have all these things that have been identified as needing correcting, do you have any solutions or anything that can help remediate the findings that Varonis identifies?
Absolutely. And that's why when I like to talk about data protection, I call it manage and protect, because it's not just about visibility. There's a lot, I think you can, like CASB solutions can give you visibility into things, into events, but how do you take action on it, right? So a lot of Varonis's unique value, or you could say like our intellectual property, is in something called our commit engine. So the ability to actually simulate and commit changes back to these different data repositories. So what I mean by that is, because we're collecting the events that are generated on a particular file or folder, we know everyone that uses it. We can make recommendations or tell you if you were to commit a change, who would be impacted by it. And we have automation built in on top of that. So whether you're just using our software to commit those changes, or you're using our automation components to do it for you, there is remediation capabilities. On top of that, when we typically think about alerting and behavioral analytics, it's easy to think send alert to SOC sees and does things, right? Varonis also has automation response capabilities. So anything that we can alert on, we can conduct an automated response against.
So as an example for that, if I have, all of my files that have PII on them or PHI, all centralized on one share, let's say on a server, and Varonis detects a file with PII, PHI on a share that's not that protected share, you have the capability to automatically move that file to that share?
That's right. And we could even do that, take that use case and expand it out a little bit more. Maybe certain classifications of certain files belong on a certain share and certain other classifications belong on another share. Or maybe the solution is that when we find it, we just need to quarantine it because somebody needs to decide where it goes, right? And also being able to, and again, this is how I kind of always try to tie it back to the whole platform approach. Being able to just move the data is one thing, but being able to know while it sat in that risky location, who used it is another thing that the platform aims to do, right? While this data was exposed, I think about this when I think about our large government clients. When we detect spillage or when classified information spills from classified networks to unclassified networks. That concept applies to other organizations as well, but it's pretty easily understood in the government space. We want to tell them, hey, you had this spillage, but nobody accessed it. Or you had this spillage and lots of people accessed it, which changes the risk level of that incident or what actions they would then take on it.
So for as far as like authorization, does Varonis connect into AD? Like what is your source of truth for the original folder
we crawl that ourselves
for older folder permissions?
We crawl that ourselves. So another part of like where our intellectual property is to go out and interrogate all these file systems by reading the actual ACLs that exist on all the files and folders for all the different data sources that we support. And when we see a group, right, to answer your question very directly, we also are querying AD to know who the members of that group are. So we can do a combination. We'll use like a NAS array, for instance, a combination of the file system permissions on that NAS, like a NetApp or an Isilon, along with the groups that we see on that ACL. We'll also see directly provisioned users. And then again, like to make it a platform, we can also tell you if any of those people are actually leveraging that access. So that's where we're able to make change, is give you the visibility into who has access to it and who's actually leveraging that access. And then to Anthony's point, to be able to actually, remediate that access if it's deemed overexposed.
Can you guys do, I almost use an acronym. I was almost going to say, so do your JIT capabilities. So people listening in, what is JIT? Lloyd, what does JIT mean?
Just in time, I think. There's so many acronyms.
Yeah, no,
okay,
it's just in time.
My thought is to use them because there's so many, right? Yeah.
Well, my thought is, can you use this to augment an existing process, right? Like I have developers in my managed file transfer solution, and I need them to be able to set up a connection, but I want to make sure they don't leave that folder behind. So can I JIT that spot? They go in, they create their folder, they do their batch file for their data extract, they open the connection, their SFTP connection or HTTPS connection, do their test, push it back, and then they get busy or they have something else come in. They've now orphaned that folder, for the lack of a better term, but I want that folder gone. I want it gone because maybe that initial round might have had test data that was, de-identified and relevant, or maybe it's because we do have an NDA and all the proper paperwork signed that was a actual test PHI file, right? Like this company A has been authorized for this data set. We're going to do an extract with real data, but in the test environment, send it out. I want to make darn sure that we went in, I want to kill the file inside it, and I want to kill the folder after that test has been complete.
So it's a couple step approach, right? What you're talking about in the eloquent sense of like, can I flip a switch in Varonis and do that? It's a few switches, right? And as long as it's on our supported platforms. So to go back to something I said earlier, Varonis is focused on a lot of the Windows infrastructure. So Windows file servers, SharePoint, Exchange on-prem, all of Office 365 to include Teams and OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange Online, Azure AD, all the popular NAS platforms, NetApps, Isilons, the list is pretty long, VPN, DNS, and web proxy. So if the data you're talking about sits there, we can implement automation workflows around it. Whether it's, hey, Varonis sees this sensitive data sitting in this place. Does it belong here? Do I need to move it somewhere else or stage it for deletion? Or some of what the use case you were describing sounds to me like, let's alert on activity around it, and let's respond to that activity. So that's where you might have a hybrid between leveraging our data migration technology, which we call the data transport engine, with our alert and response technology, which we call data alert.
Okay, so I see. So you'd have multiple solutions for that. One, you could just simply create an alert saying, "Hey, developer, hey Lloyd, you created this folder 7 days ago. Are you done using it? Our folder retention policy in our test system is 14 days. It's going to be gone in 7 days."
Right.
Then going over to Anthony's point that the 14 days does come up, I want that automated cleanup. We've warned Lloyd, right? Now that folder's got to go bye-bye.
Yeah, and just to be really specific, across a lot of capabilities, we are not a deletion. We are a staging for deletion. So we will move the files. We can, from a services standpoint, help you implement a script, but we don't have a certified deletion function inside the platform. Just to make sure, I don't want to mislead anybody, any of your audience members.
No, that's okay. That means that if your Varonis software got hacked, it can't go deleting stuff.
Yeah. We can do those. We can put it in a place where very few people can access it, and we can tell someone, hey, it's ready to go. It met one of the rules for deletion. It hit
so
one
almost
of our
like a quarantine,
rules.
Right?
Correct.
Like a bad person. You're here, nobody can do anything with you until somebody.
And we told somebody about that, and maybe you have a storage admin that runs or a reformat job or runs a bit shredder, one of those popular file shredding or disk shredding utilities on that particular place.
So say we have a 10 years of legacy bad practice on a file system. Everything's running.
That's not a thing. That has never happened. Right? Never happened, Lloyd. What are you talking about?
Yeah, this isn't real world, right? This never happens. But say everything's running as root, the attributes are lost to the physical files. They're just shows root's accessing it. So in those situations, there might be a security group that grants them access to that file system, but you can't get down to what users access to what. So how does Varonis help in that situation?
Well, so interestingly enough, I actually think we do typically get to tell you who accesses what, and that's because of where we implement our technology. So if we go back 15 years ago when the company was founded, we implemented kernel drivers to not have to turn on native auditing. And what that kernel driver is doing is saying, this is the IP or the MAC address or the SID that is interacting with this object from a permission standpoint. And we are recording that event and using the analytics that we've done from all those walks I talked about earlier to assemble that information and present it to someone in the platform, as opposed to depending on a native audit event that might say root. Now, granted, this depends on the platform, right? We're getting into very specific technologies here, but that is our general approach.
Excellent.
So Matt, one of my favorite things to do when I was at Varonis was to go through a POC, although I don't think it's really a POC in the Varonis world, and to uncover the stuff that's actually out there. So can you talk about the risk assessment a little bit, how that works, the types of stuff that gets found? I've certainly got some war wounds that I could talk about as well. But
absolutely.
I'm trying to not interject a lot here because of the familiarity. So I'm letting these other guys.
I don't mind at all. I like that there's a Varonis expert out there on the phone. So what Matt's talking about is our go-to-market strategy is around something we call risk assessment. It's a completely free service that we provide. You could compare it to some services you could consume from some of those big accounting firms, right? Where we want to figure out, where is your sensitive data? Who has access to it? Where might be at rest, overexposed? This is also where we're going to enable all of our classification rules to tell you that you might have sensitive data that you didn't even know about. Maybe you didn't think you had any health insurance information, but you didn't actually realize that your HR team puts all the HR claims in a folder on a file share, and you have health records that you might have an obligation to report because your company is self-insured and you didn't even think you had that risk, right? Or maybe we find out, and this is the unfortunate case for a lot of companies, that a large majority of your data is open to every single person in the company, right? It's just the everyone group is on that ACL and it's prolific throughout your environment. And that's what we do. Our strategy is to show you the risks to your data. And we also do run traditional POCs POCs where people have use cases and they want us to show how we meet those use cases. But for a lot of organizations, data security is so new to them, they let this expert service provide an insight and a lens into where they might have risk against their data and what our recommendations are to do about it. Another thing that's really grown in the platform, probably since you left Varonis, was also leveraging all of our out-of-the-box analytics during that assessment. So we're not just going to give you a lens into your data. We're also going to enable our, many threat models that come out of the box. We're going to create user baselines. We're going to figure out what's normal and start to alert on abnormalities or even things that look like cyber threats within that assessment, so that we can also do an assessment as to what your monitoring capabilities are like. Like, for instance, one of the things I find is people have a hard time with insider threats, right? They feel like they've got a strong posture in regards to protecting their endpoints from malware, but they can't necessarily articulate how they'll know that an admin that has control of that machine is account's not compromised and they're not misusing or abusing those privileges, or how a service account isn't misusing or abusing the fact that it has a high level of access. And that's oftentimes where our analytics comes in. And that's a little different than a risk assessment from a data standpoint, but it's still kind of a monitoring assessment, or I'd call it a data risk and threat assessment, because we do want to leverage our analytics to look for threats, whether they're internal or external inside of your environment.
So speaking of those threats and the risks to the data, so if you've got unstructured data moving between the cloud and on-prem in 365, let's say, and you have external guests accessing your data and your information, how do you help the SOC, for example, dig into forensics where that type of situation is occurring and you have this data moving around?
Yeah, this speaks to what I think is like my number one favorite part of Varonis. And so I'm sure you guys have ever looked at a log before, and I'm sure our audience members at some point in their career have looked at a security event. When you look at a log or a security event, you typically have a lot of questions that you want to add context to that event to figure out, how do I say that's good or bad? And one of the things I love about Varonis is what we do to events that we collect automatically. So we're going to take the classification information that we're pulling in, whether it's the classification of a file or the classification of account, or the fact that we're going to resolve IPs to host names or external IPs to locations, and we're going to write all of that information to the event that we present to an analyst. So when they read that, for instance, collaboration event, instead of just seeing Matt shared files externally with Aaron and Anthony, it's going to say Matt shared a spreadsheet containing 100 records of PII with Anthony and Aaron, and subsequently with like one click, it's really two clicks, and Aaron and Anthony have both accessed that file multiple times, right? So you've got the whole storyline of how that file is being shared. Now take that same risk, and this is something that, again, we uncover in our risk assessments. Someone's shared a folder that contains sensitive data with an anonymous link, right? And they've just said anyone that has a link can access it. Oftentimes it's very difficult to say, well, did someone outside of our organization inadvertently access sensitive data? Again, a few clicks, since we know which files are sensitive, we can create a search that says, is sensitive? Yes. This external link, show me if anyone has accessed it, and you're immediately going to get that report back. And that's because we combined that information, right? We had to go out and classify the files. We had to add that information into the events on those files.
Is there a level of Office 365 licensing that's required for that feature set? Because out of the box, if you have, an F1 or just an E3 license, there are a lot of logging and audit functionality that you just don't have access to. Does Varonis tie in to those logs, and therefore you would need, an Azure
So
license?
yeah, we leverage the Graph API to be able to pull those events ourselves. So you don't necessarily need a high level of Microsoft licensing to take advantage of our features. And even if you do have a high level of Microsoft licensing, oftentimes organizations are still turning to Varonis to be able to really get that full level of detail that they're looking for, right? Comprehensive classification scanning, a classification engine to design and identify your own custom data, rules that help you identify threats beyond just at the moment of authentication, right? So what Microsoft does a good job of telling you about like risky logons and using maybe conditional access to prevent risky logons, right? But what about if that device is compromised because that person's on a bad network? Or what about if that user themselves is an insider threat, right? That's where you need the actual data access events and the classification information to be able to go even deeper. So for organizations, wherever they are in their Microsoft licensing, they stand to benefit from, our assessment to figure out how we can provide value on top of that. And for an organization that has nothing, well, obviously, the value proposition is tremendous, right? Like they have
That
so
you have
much to
something
gain.
now.
Right. Right.
I mean, I can
Also,
say from my experience that companies really don't have a good idea of what's in their data or where it is, or definitely not what is actually in their data. So for me, it was always very, and I always enjoyed whenever I was working with a company that was like, our data is good. We know what's out there. We know where it is. We'll do this risk assessment thing, but we're not really that worried about it. I was always like, ooh, this is going to be a good one, because inevitably those were the companies that had the most amount of skeletons in their data. So, seeing, not knowing that people are storing their, their tax information, their passport information on their personal drives, all sorts of, we think of data, we always think of work data, but the amount of personal data that people store, you give people a place to store data and they're going to store it there. The amount of, personal data that probably shouldn't be on a corporate network to start with, that we would find was alone enough to scare most organizations that I work with. So
just to add on to that, Matt, sometimes too, we found operational use cases. Like I was a customer of Varonis for 5 years before joining the company. And even though I brought Varonis on to help get an idea of where my sensitive data was to help meet some audit requirements, one of the things I realized, we were going through a massive storage migration, going from the Isilon we had to like the brand spanking new one. If there's an EMC rep listening, we were spending the big bucks with EMC to get the latest and greatest technology. And it was very expensive. It was a multi-million-dollar project. But I came in and was like, hey guys, only 15% of our data is actually used by anyone over the course of the last couple of years. Why would we move 100% of it to this super slick, fast disk? Why wouldn't we approach like a hybrid solution, like maybe even a hybrid cloud solution where we have some cold or even frozen disk for this inactive data? Obviously, security professional, I want to get rid of it, but I couldn't even approach that with the company I worked for. So I had to go for, we're going to have it, but it's just going to be less expensive. And I was able to save millions and millions of dollars in storage planning costs, right? Which is just a byproduct of these insights. It's not really like what we sell Varonis for, right? But there's a lot of these operational use cases or insights that you can get out of having this data at your fingertips.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I was trying to find a spot to bring up that, that's another thing that we don't always think about. We think about, what data is being used and who's accessing it, but what about all the stuff? I'm trying to keep this PG rated for the YouTube channel. All the stuff that has just been sitting there for forever, and sensitive data that's been sitting there forever, far beyond anyone's, reasonable retention policies. I think that's important as well. For the reasons that you mentioned, from just a storage cost standpoint, why keep this stuff around or put it on expensive disk? But also from a risk perspective, do I really need PII that's 15 years old sitting out there? I probably don't, unless there's some legal reason for it. But otherwise, I should certainly have a policy, a corporate policy.
Health regulations.
Yeah, right.
Wouldn't have to deal. What's the maximum? Isn't there 21? Overall, I think the average is
21 plus 7 or something.
But I think there is.
There are certainly certain industries where that sort of stuff needs to be capped, but for a lot of organizations and verticals, there isn't. And so why not?
Well, and only some information meets that criteria, right?
Also,
you can just keep everything, back up your entire infrastructure for 30 years, or are you only going to back up the stuff that you're legally required to?
Yeah.
And this kind of also makes me think about a conversation I like to have, which is when you ask a security professional what their threat surface of their organization is, they're going to talk to you about open ports, protocols, and services that are hanging out in their DMZ. They're going to talk about the results of their vulnerability scans, or the fact that their users are inevitably capable of being phished. But one of the things I don't often hear about is like how bad the global access is in their environment, right? One malicious process, how much data can it access, right? From any one compromised user's account. One device, how much can it get at from a network, in a data standpoint? And oftentimes I find that organizations don't even realize that they're one ransomware affection away from a very, very bad day, because 50+% of their data is open to everyone. Even if you have world-class backups, right? If you can't get it ahead of that particular infection, you're still going to have a massive headache to deal with, right? Like restoring half your environment is going to be a massive undertaking, even with the greatest solutions that are out there to do it, right? It's not going to be like a couple clicks and your environment is back to normal. There's going to be some bumps along the way. And thinking about my threat surface extends to data, how can I reduce the amount of information that any one person has access to, is going to help you with all of those use cases: insider threats, external threats, uncontrollable malware, right? Storage costs and consumption. Because what you're going to realize is that by and large, people use particular data sets, but they don't use everything, right? No one needs access to everything besides maybe like the backups things, and the maybe a couple of IT admins.
So I always like to bring things back to, the business conversation. And I think this is a perfect example of it. You should and better have policies around your data, around storage of data, around retention of data. And then you need to have solutions in place to facilitate those business processes, right? It's always has to go back to that. Matt, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about, and we do bring this up on every one of these as well, is a little bit about, I hear a lot of people complain, hey, I bought product X from vendor X, and then I never heard another word from them. They didn't help me get things implemented. Oh, I got some professional services, but after that, they totally disappeared, and we didn't hear about them for 3 years until they had another PO for us to sign. Can you talk a little bit, and I know you've been heavily involved in this aspect of it, can you talk a little bit about what working with Varonis, what becoming a customer of Varonis looks like, and how you guys handle those post-sales type situations?
Yeah, I like to call that our customer experience. And I'm a big part of that, for a big pillar of the platform. So when you become a Varonis customer, obviously you're going to have some initial services to get you going, but we're a very value focused organization. So we have a subscription based business model, right? Which means we need to continuously show and earn value year over year, not just like have a large, one-time purchase that you pay maintenance and support on. And so between, the sales team themselves, which they're not so densely assigned accounts that you'll actually get to know that your sales rep and sales engineer, they will intimately know what your core use cases are. And on at least a quarterly basis, entirely dedicated meeting to just like how you're meeting those core use cases, as well as regular office hours to like get the job done, right? On top of that, I created the incident response and security architecture team to offer complementary services around the threat detection and response part of Varonis. So that means getting the system up and running, helping to make sure that the threat models are tuned and customized to your environment, implementing any custom use cases that you might have. Like maybe you're like, nobody should touch this file, but this person, I want to be alerted anytime anybody other than this person touches this file. Obviously, we don't have an out of the box rule for that, so we have to create one. And then also taking you from there into like the operational use of Varonis, plugging it into the right systems, into the right places, emailing the right people when certain threat models trigger, implementing automated responses. All that's provided as a value add on top of the subscription, right? Our goal is to make Varonis a part of your day-to-day security program from a threat detection and response standpoint. And then to augment us on the data governance and the classification side, we also have a customer success team. So for organizations that are using a lot of our products, they're going to be able to leverage that team in order to also be, operationally focused on how week after week do I achieve the mission from a data security standpoint. In addition to that, one of the things that I think Varonis does really well is free training. So we offer a live instructor-led Varonis Certified Administrator course that's continuously running. In addition to webinars, like even just participating here, obviously people can learn a little bit about Varonis, but we do a lot of instructional webinars on how to actually use our products to accomplish particular tasks. We publish a lot of guides on how to do it as well, with the goal of, between the services that you're either getting with the subscription, purchasing alongside of it. Obviously, we have a remediation team for customers that need more of that, like, I need you to do this for me, or, maybe even leveraging like one of our certified delivery partners, Optiv being the largest and most premier one, to be able to deliver those services. Or, you're getting people sent to Varonis Certified Administrator training and you're doing it yourself. We're trying to create a lot of options and make it so that it's really kind of balls in your court to leverage all the stuff that we're offering you to get the mission done. And we feel like that's really created, again, a value-centric organization focused on, again, what's most important to you. Let's make sure we're getting it done. Let's have periodic check-ins to make sure it happens. And let's give you people to reach out to when things get tough or when stuff hits the fan, as I would like to say, giving you a team of security professionals to reach out to when you're in times of crisis.
All right, time for go ahead, Anthony.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So thinking about that with the customer service, and I think you just touched on it. What's kind of the recipe? Like when a customer engages Varonis and says, "Yep, we're going to do this. We're all in. Let's go." From the customer perspective that you see, what is the recipe to make the Varonis implementation the most successful? Are there things they should prepare ahead of time? Like
what I also like about Varonis is like our eval environment. So when we're spoking your initial trial Varonis, we're rolling that into production in most cases, unless you're an enormous company, right? If we did a tiny little subset of your environment because you're like a Fortune 100 company, we probably can't roll that eval installation into a production installation. But like, let's take that aside, right? It's a very small number of companies. We're probably just expanding our infrastructure. We identified the use cases that were most important to you, like the very specific, like I need to be able to find this kind of data, or I need to get control over Office 365, or I want to implement an insider threat monitoring solution. And we have a services that would be included with that purchase that delivered by our PS team or like a partner like Optivs to get you there within, the weeks to months after your initial purchase. And then from there, it's about turning that from okay, this is how we do that, to how do we evolve that over time. And that's where we're having a regular cadence between you and your account team to do that. So like our account teams are not just a pre-sales organization, right? They're an account manager, right? They're not just a sales representative, so they very much are involved with, the renewals and, the expansion of what you do with Varonis. Obviously they're motivated for that to happen. So, it ends up building an ecosystem where customers feel like they have the right attention, and as long as they want to achieve the mission, they can do so. So, you kind of like, just to give a more simple answer, your services that would be included with the purchase, usually that's that's not a cost. Usually we're providing some no cost services with a purchase, except in certain circumstances. And that's what's getting you to like, okay, this is implemented and I'm using it. And then from there you have your account team and all these other supportive organizations. You also have a support team, right? I haven't talked about that yet, that you can reach out to help you achieve that mission, whether you're getting trained to do it or you're paying a partner to do it for you.
So speaking of cost, I've heard a lot of solutions that you offer. Is it we purchase Varonis and we get access to all the things, or is it each solution is a line item?
Yeah, we are a modular based solution. So we really use our assessments to figure out what products are most important to you. For instance, you brought up a product called Data Transport Engine. You might not know that that's what it was called when you were asking me about it, but that is an individual SKU, right? So that's a line item, but not everybody needs that, right? Some people aren't going to be at the point where they're ready to do things like that until they're further along in their customer journey. So they might not buy that license initially. The other thing is, in our switch to subscription model, there's a scaling discounting. So as customers adopt more licenses, they end up paying less per license over time. And that modular based approach allows us to do that versus having like a very large sticker price to get you like an enterprise agreement for everything right out of the gate, which you probably wouldn't use. I actually don't know of any customer that's consumed the entire platform up front and was able to get everything they wanted out of it in year one. Usually organizations that are doing that have really big problems. Like they just had a massive breach and they're maybe using us and our services and Optiv and their services and maybe even another third party because they have like legal obligation to make change. And that's when they're adopting large chunks of the platform. Most customers are starting out with a handful of licenses like Office 365 project or on-prem cleanup project or a migration project where, basically are getting them to the value target, as I like to call it, or they're achieving the mission that they originally intended on. And we're saying, hey, what do you want to do next? And that also helps, break the costs up into chunks as well.
So how long does it take to do what's the average amount of time it takes to do like a discovery phase so that in order for you to get a solid baseline to work from?
Yeah, I would say, 3 to 6 weeks. 3 weeks for smaller companies because we can crawl most of your data in that time. That's really the long pole in the tent, as I'd like to say, is the actual the initial classification scan. But then after that, since we're monitoring the files, we only have to look for changes or new files to keep scanning. So it takes about 3 to 6 weeks for the really big companies. I'm thinking petabytes of data to be able to complete that initial scan. And then from there, it's all about deciding, like, what do you want to do about the stuff we found? That's probably I find whenever I'm like meeting with an executive, it's always us doing our automated part is the easy part. You implementing policies so that you can use our remediation features and broadly impact your environment is probably the longest pole in the tent from a Varonis perspective. Like actually driving the cultural change to quarantine your stale data or implement a data retention policy or set up and get approval to have the business participate in access requests and entitlement reviews. Implementing the software to do that is rather simple, right? That's our value proposition.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
I mean, if the one thing that I will say is if you want to help your organization gain some traction on security and understand how much risk you actually have out there in your data, it's a perfect way to do it. It will definitely pull back the
the assessment will do it for you. And there's no cost, no obligation, right? For some companies, they're spending about a half a day with us to get up and running, and we're having 2 meetings, one to check, make sure everything's going, and another one to present the findings. Other companies are a lot more hands-on during the assessments. They're actually using the product and trying to explore what it would be like to have operational use. But some companies just take us up on the assessment, and we don't mind, right? From our standpoint, data security is still in the industries. People are still learning about what that means to them. And we want to have the opportunity to show you from number one company in the space, what it means to us and how that could impact you.
All right.
Yep.
That's all I have.
Me too.
All right. Yeah, I think we're hitting our time. We say half hour. It never seems to be a half an hour, but I think some of that is because, see, when you start having real conversations, it becomes much more fascinating, right? So, all right, with that, Matthew, super appreciate you jumping on with us and Varonis for doing this with us. For everyone watching, please subscribe, do all that fun YouTube stuff that we keep asking you to do. As y'all can see, I am wearing the CloudCon official CloudCon inaugural t-shirt. While this will be on YouTube forever, we are, as of today, 2 weeks away from the start of YouTube, from CloudCon. So please go get your tickets, be inaugural. We're going to have a great time there. We have some other fun events coming up, including one with Varonis coming up yet this year as well. With that, again, thanks everyone. I appreciate it. And leave us some comments and feedback and all that good stuff as well.
Yeah. Thank you guys for the opportunity to join in. Have a good one.
Absolutely. See you for episode 9.